In this video, we're going to talk about 10 ideas you can use to train and inspire your volunteers. I remember for the longest time, I always wanted to save ideas for what could I use to cast vision? What could we use to train volunteers? What could we use to inspire them and motivate them? And so I would have like an Evernote. Anybody still use Evernote? And I would save anything I would see. And I'm talking like 15, 20 years ago, it was more common where people were using their blogs almost like social media. And so if I saw an idea from another church leader, like, oh, that's really good, let me put that here. Or if a pastor preached a message and I happened to see that they used this illustration or this story, I'd save that. Now, if it was a personal story, I couldn't use it. But if it was the kind of story that I could, replicate, maybe it was an account from the Bible and they used it to teach this, I would do that. Now, what I'm about to share with you with these 10 ideas really isn't any of those specifics because these are going to be focused on bigger things, bigger picture, a little bit more general, like any volunteer could be trained and inspired using these 10 ideas. And the key is to be intentional and consistent when you're training volunteers. It's far too common. I've done this before. I've made this mistake where we just, once a year, it's like, oh yeah, we need to inspire them. Let's come up with something. Let's do a training. What should we talk about? Or maybe it's when they're down and it's like, you know what? The morale, something, it's been a hard season. We need to train and inspire them, motivate them. That's really not, you got to get that in there when you need to in an emergency situation, but we should be training consistently and being intentional about that. So there is a previous video you can watch. I'll link it above about how to have a monthly focus with volunteers. And it might be important to watch that first and then watch this one because these 10 ideas are built around that concept that this is a monthly focus for your volunteers. This isn't in the weeds. This isn't for each specific volunteer role. This is something that all volunteers could benefit from. So keep in mind, these are going to apply to any and all volunteers. Could be kids, small group leader, student ministry, teacher, host on stage, greeter in the lobby or in the parking lot at your church. This is big picture, helping people see that. So here are 10 ideas for training and inspiring your volunteers. Number one, share your church's or your ministry's vision in detail. So for example, our vision was to start a church to help reach people who are not a part of any church. Training monthly would not include just saying that, right? It would be important to say that in the training, but teach on it. Why are we trying to reach people who are not a part of any church? Churches, all churches, my church included, reach people who are coming from another church. I came from another church when we helped start our church, right? So did all of our staff. So why is it reach people who are not a part of any church? That's an important thing to distinguish there. And so whatever your church's vision is, or whatever your ministry's vision is, teach that in detail. Help people understand why that is what the vision is. Help people understand why it's needed. I live in Maryland. Our church is here in Maryland. And from here, if you go northeast all the way to Maine, I think it's something like a quarter of the population of the country lives here, or maybe a little more than a quarter, lives in that corridor from Baltimore, DC, all the way up to the Northeast and Maine. But it is not one of the most populated church regions of the country, right? There's more churches in the South and the Bible Belt and some things like that. So one of the things we'll talk about when we talk about our vision is we want to reach people who are not a part of any church. There are far more people here in this region who don't have a church than there are in many other places in the country. And so we want to change that for sure. Number two, collect 3 stories to share that celebrate the vision. So, and this would be like maybe you bring people in and you interview them, right there in person. Maybe you interview them on a Zoom call or on video, and then you play it for volunteers. But, nothing celebrates the vision more than telling stories. So pick, 1, 2, 3 people that can share a story that celebrate what you're trying to accomplish with your vision and share that with volunteers. The third one, and this one might sound a little bit like an update. That's boring. Update volunteers on how the vision is being accomplished. So the stories can do that for sure, better than anything. But sometimes we just neglect to talk about some of the ways that the vision is already being accomplished because, I don't know, we just forget about it. We think everybody knows. For example, I know of a church where they just baptized 36 people at one baptism celebration on a weekend. That church has only baptized a total of, at their peak, probably 72, 75 people in 1 year is the most they've ever baptized in 1 year. So here that church just had About half of that number decide to get baptized in one day. Well, it would be a mistake to not say that to anybody else. You know what I mean? Like, it was a great day. People celebrated. They probably saw the baptisms. So there was like some exposure to it, but it would be a mistake to not tell volunteers, especially, but even certainly the whole church, remind them of what happened, update them. Hey, we had 36 baptisms. And did you know that the most baptisms we ever had was 75 or whatever? So we had almost half that in one day. That is amazing. Way to go. That's one example of how you can update, and the update can sound boring, but not when it comes to vision. When it comes to vision, updating, sharing that with volunteers is helpful. People want to know that they're giving their life, giving their time, giving their energy to something that is working. I hesitate to say winning, like they want to know they're winning. And this is ministry, it's not about winning, but you want to know you're part of something. And yes, there are failures and there's doubts and there's, long seasons of like, okay, is this working at all? I don't know. So when it's working, when the vision is being accomplished, make sure that everybody knows that. Fourth idea, teach your church's strategy and how your ministry fits. Strategy helps people understand, how are we doing this? How does this piece apply to that piece? Which comes first? So, and again, we usually don't talk about this. This is bigger picture. It's not, we'll talk about like the strategy for how to do something really specific. Like, how do we greet first time guests? Here's the strategy. Do this, do this, do this. That's the strategy. That's really important. But we also want to talk about the strategy for your whole church. How do we help make disciples? How does our church reach people who are not a part of any church and help them follow Jesus? And then how does your ministry fit within that? Whatever your ministry is, teach that strategy, the big picture, and then teach how your ministry fits. And the great thing is the volunteers will play a bigger and better role in the strategy. They'll help people take the steps that you want them to take as long as they know what the strategy is and how their role fits in it. Cover one of your church's values or culture statements. So if your church has a list of values or a list of culture statements, we did this for a long time where our church has 11 culture statements. That's a lot. We don't really expect anybody to memorize them. They're almost like an excuse to talk about how we do things. And so for a year, we covered one of those culture statements in every volunteer huddle that we did for our kids ministry and our student ministry. So it was a chance to get out of the weeds and say, okay, big picture, who are we trying to be as a church? And let's talk about one of those culture statements every month. That's one of my favorite ideas, actually. And if you don't have values or culture statements for your ministry, maybe you should create some. And you might create 6, and you'll cover them once every month for 6 months. Another idea, talk about your church's mission statement with the caveat that if it's good, which I feel like I'm going to take heat for this in the comments. Some church mission statements just aren't very good. When somebody set out to make them, they thought we need to say everything in the world about our church. Let's talk about our theology and how it got started and what we're all about and what the Bible says about it. The reality is every church has the same mission statement. It's the Great Commission. Go and make disciples. That is the mission statement. And you could use that verse. You could take Matthew 28 and you could make it your church's mission statement. Now, most churches don't. And actually, I think that's okay. Because if somebody is new coming into your church, I don't know if you do want to use that exactly. What does that mean? That's church language, right? That's biblical language that you want to teach them on. But a lot of churches just rephrase that. Our church says helping people find their way back to God. Some other church might say find and follow Jesus. You can find many different ways to say your church's mission statement. And I would teach on that as one of your monthly big ideas to inspire and train volunteers. But not if it's the one-page thing, that is just too in-depth and, it just goes too far. So you're going to have to figure out if you think your mission statement is good or not and decide if you want to use that in training. 7th idea, emphasize why we prioritize reaching the next generation. Now, you might be watching this and you lead adult small group ministry or worship arts or something, next steps and assimilation or whatever it might be, young adults. I'm biased. I think we should all talk about and emphasize why we prioritize reaching the next generation. I've heard Andy Stanley say before, pose the question, what's the faith of the next generation worth? What's the faith of the next generation worth to you? Leave your answer in the comments. My guess is most of the comments will say everything. That's what I would say, because it is. And so figure out a way to emphasize why we prioritize reaching the next generation. Even if that's not your ministry, that's still going to be a helpful part of your church. I don't know any church that doesn't care about reaching the next generation. So talk about maybe current stats and trends. Talk about, I think of Growing Young and books like that from Fuller and Sticky Faith, and why students and kids need 5 caring adults in their lives. I think about the resources from Orange and how they talk about how the church and the family should partner together. So there's lots of things out there that can help you, but just use that to come up with a training to emphasize why your church prioritizes reaching the next generation. Number 8, teach on the importance of personal spiritual growth. Far too often when we're training volunteers, the list of things that we want to hit always includes like how to and the ministry and skills and mission and vision and strategy, all great things, obviously, because I put most of them on the list. But then we neglect personal spiritual health. Our ministry as staff, our ministry as volunteers is an overflow of our relationship with God. So how can we teach the importance of that personal spiritual growth to our volunteers to make sure they are prioritizing that in their own life? You could do many months on that right there. And every year you could have 3 months a year, or 4 months a year, maybe it's once a quarter, you're coming back and you're focusing on teaching them the importance of their personal spiritual growth. This is a little unique because it depends on if you lead a ministry that has a curriculum or some type of content, but share the core principles of your curriculum or your content. My church uses Orange curriculum, and sometimes it's easy to forget that, hey, all the volunteers don't actually know why we use this curriculum, what the strategy is, how the pieces of it work together, the reasoning behind it. In fact, there's a lot of, I would say there's some confusion out there among church leaders. If you're a kids ministry leader, I think some kids ministry staff and student ministry staff who use Orange curriculum or any curriculum don't fully understand the why behind the what. And that's really helpful because oh, that's why they're doing this, or that's why it's written that way, or that's why they did this and not that. And it's helpful for volunteers too. The more they know about your curriculum and your content, the better they're going to lead that. And that's true even if, like, think of student ministry. Why are you teaching this series? That's helpful for them to know. In adult small groups, why are we focusing on this during the season? Or why don't we, use content from this, theological position? That's always really helpful. 10th idea, connect the dots for how every volunteer role works together. We did this in a big kids students combined training we did years ago. I talked about the 7 things our family ministry does. It's a blog post that I can link that's shared on my blog somewhere. I remember writing the script for what I was going to talk about and not liking it. I thought, this is stupid. This is boring. It's like, I'm just talking about what we do. Like this, I feel like I'm a museum tour guide or something like that. It just seems boring. But we did it. I didn't have any time to change it or tweak it. It was like, okay, we got to do this. Got to stick with it. And man, was I wrong, because I overlooked how easy it is for volunteers to either forget or not even know how they are connected to the bigger strategy of our church and our family ministry. And so they loved it. Everybody loved it. And it surprised me. I thought this was one I wanted to put in the trash can, but and I think it just came down to people love to know they're part of the bigger picture. What is the bigger plan? How does it fit together? And why what I do matters? Why this thing that I'm doing, why does that matter? And how does it fit in the bigger picture? So if you do that, make sure you do connect all the dots. Like, try not to leave anybody out. We did 7 things we do, but every volunteer role could be plugged into one of the 7 things. So choose one of these for your next monthly volunteer focus. Watch the next video on how to create a year-long strategy for training your volunteers. Doing something monthly, having a bigger idea, is just one part of that strategy. So watch that video to see how to create a full, complete year-long strategy for training your volunteers.